Imagine sitting in first class, settling into your seat, when a sudden smack cuts through the quiet cabin. The sound is so sharp it feels like the whole plane stops breathing. Every head whips toward row 4A. A flight attendant stands frozen, her hand still raised. Gasps ripple down the aisle. Phones flash up to record. And right there, calm and steady in a crisp white shirt and navy blue suit, Marcus Ellison doesn't move. He just stares ahead while an entire plane struggles to understand what they've just witnessed. Now picture yourself watching this unfold just a few feet away. Your heart is pounding, but you can't decide if you should speak, record, or stay silent. Would you defend a stranger or let fear of getting involved keep you quiet? Before we go further, pause for a second, because stories like this need to be heard. Tap like right now and subscribe so more people can see how power really moves behind the polished smiles of first class. Your click isn't just support, it's a way to make sure moments like this don't disappear in silence. Marcus didn't flinch, not even when the engines groaned and the overhead lights flickered. He simply adjusted his cuff, eyes locked forward, as if the chaos around him was nothing more than background noise. To anyone else it looked like humiliation. But Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. Minutes earlier, everything had felt routine. He'd walked down the jet bridge with quiet confidence, his boarding pass ready, polished shoes clicking against the metal floor. Gate agents smiled politely, but their eyes lingered a fraction too long on his skin, his tailored suit, the name printed on his ticket. They called it a random procedure, a quick check, words meant to sound harmless but heavy with a history too familiar. The first-class cabin smelled of coffee and worn leather. Seatbelt buckles clinked like tiny alarms. A stewardess with a bright but brittle smile met his eyes and tilted her head just enough to say, "You don't belong here." He felt the stare before he even heard the words. Then came the command, sharp and cold. "Sir, you need to stand. Now." Passengers turned, their curiosity wrapped in nervous silence. Some pretended to scroll their phones while sneaking glances, others angled cameras to catch every second. Marcus stood, smooth and deliberate, his mind racing but his face calm. Years of boardroom battles had taught him the power of stillness. Every heartbeat of silence made everyone else confront the discomfort they pretended not to feel. Then the slap. A sound so clean and sudden it cut through the steady drone of the engines. Gasps broke like a wave. A child whispered to her mother, "Why did she hit him?" The mother said nothing, eyes wide with shock. Marcus's breathing stayed even. Instead of reacting, he reached for his phone. One swipe, one quiet call, and the real game began. On the other end, an airline executive's private line lit up, before the crew even realized what had happened. From the galley, the flight attendant who struck him fiddled with a safety card, her knuckles pale. Behind her, the cockpit door cracked open. A shadow shifted inside, and a figure stepped out, a pilot, eyes sharp, scanning the cabin like a soldier assessing a battlefield. For a heartbeat, Marcus and the pilot exchanged a look, something unspoken passing between them. The seatbelt chime dinged. The intercom buzzed. A calm voice announced a slight operational delay, that polished corporate phrase meant to hide more than it revealed. Outside the windows, runway lights blurred in the dark, but inside, the tension only tightened. Marcus straightened his cuffs again, a small movement that felt like a declaration. He knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond this cabin, phones were ringing, executives scrambling. The airline thought they controlled this flight. They were wrong. And as the cockpit door opened wider, a new silhouette appeared, one that carried an authority no crew member could ignore. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would speak first. Marcus Ellison stepped through the jet bridge, the quiet hum of the tunnel wrapping around him like a warning he couldn't quite name. The smell of coffee and recycled air mixed with the faint scent of jet fuel, sharp enough to sting. He tightened the button of his white shirt, adjusted the smooth lapel of his navy blue suit, and kept his pace steady. His first-class boarding pass felt heavy in his hand, though it weighed no more than paper. Inside the cabin, the shift was instant. The soft glow of overhead lights cast a sterile warmth over leather seats and polished tray tables, but the energy was colder than the air-conditioned breeze. Conversations dipped as Marcus entered. A man in a Yankees cap froze mid-sentence. A woman in pearl earrings lowered her phone, pretending to read a safety card while her eyes tracked every step he took. Marcus had boarded countless flights as the CEO of a rising tech company. He was used to the small signals, delayed smiles, double takes, the way staff's eyes flicked from his suit to his skin before landing on his ticket. Tonight, those signals came sharper, like paper cuts he could feel without bleeding. The lead flight attendant, a tall woman with perfect posture and a name tag that gleamed under the cabin lights, gave him a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, but her tone carried something tighter, like a door held half open. Her eyes lingered an extra beat on his first-class boarding pass before she stepped aside. Marcus slid into his seat, row 4A, window view of the dark Atlanta tarmac. The leather was cool against his palms, but the air pressed heavy against his chest. Behind him, a soft whisper floated forward. "Random check," one passenger murmured. Another voice answered, barely audible, "Maybe he's in the wrong seat." He exhaled slowly, forcing his heartbeat to match the steady thrum of the engines outside. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught him the art of silence. Power wasn't in the first move, it was in waiting, watching. Still, a coil of unease wound tighter with every passing glance. Then, just as Marcus reached to buckle his seatbelt, a shadow appeared in the aisle, blocking the light, blocking the path. The shadow that blocked Marcus's seatbelt light wasn't just a passing passenger. It was the lead flight attendant, the same woman whose name tag flashed under the overhead lights like a quiet warning. Her smile was flawless, the kind you'd find in a corporate brochure, but it held no warmth. "Good evening," she said, voice crisp as a folded boarding pass. "May I see your ticket again?" Marcus looked up, steady and calm. He'd already scanned it twice at the gate and again at the cabin door. Still, he handed it over without a word. Years of subtle challenges had taught him that resistance too early could be mistaken for aggression. She studied the ticket a second longer than necessary. She murmured, the sound soft but sharp enough to slice through the low cabin chatter. Her eyes flicked to Marcus's suit, then back to his face. "This is for first class," she finally said, as if the print on the paper might suddenly change. "Yes," Marcus replied, his tone even, the single word carrying all the weight of his patience. Around them, passengers pretended not to stare but failed miserably. A man across the aisle lowered his newspaper an inch. A woman 2 rows back tilted her phone camera just enough to catch the scene. Marcus could almost feel their curiosity pressing against his back. Was this simple procedure, or something colder? The attendant's smile tightened. "Sometimes there are operational necessities," she said, dropping one of those corporate words that meant everything and nothing at once. "Random seating adjustments. For experience purposes." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Random?" he echoed. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, betraying the control she tried to maintain. "I'll need you to remain available for possible relocation," she said, placing the ticket back in his hand with a practiced motion that felt like a dismissal. Marcus met her gaze, letting silence stretch long enough for the engines outside to fill the space. He said nothing. Power, he knew, sometimes lived in the pause. As she turned away, her radio crackled softly, carrying a message Marcus couldn't quite catch. But one word cut through the static, cold and clear: "Stand by." Marcus felt the weight of the plane's air pressing against his chest the second he settled into his seat. The leather smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee, but the real sting was invisible. A hush followed him like a shadow. He adjusted his navy blue jacket, keeping his movements slow, deliberate. No sudden gestures. No reason to feed the unspoken doubt that seemed to hover over his presence in first class. A sharp click of heels broke the steady engine hum. The same stewardess who had given him that thin, pointed smile now approached, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. Her voice carried that strange mix of politeness and quiet authority that only comes from someone who knows the system bends in their favor. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remain standing for a quick, random check." Random. Marcus almost laughed. A man with a paid first-class ticket, boarding pass scanned twice, corporate credentials tucked neatly in his leather carry-on, and still, somehow, random. He glanced around the cabin. A white couple across the aisle suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. A man in a New York Yankees cap pulled out his phone but pretended to scroll. Every eye that wasn't looking was still watching. Marcus stood. Calm. Controlled. The metallic snap of his seatbelt unlocking sounded louder than it should have. He felt every breath of recycled air as the stewardess leaned in, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. "It's for operational necessity, sir." Standard procedure. Operational necessity. Another phrase that hid power behind a smile. Marcus gave a small nod, but inside, tension coiled tight. Years of boardroom negotiations had trained him to stay silent when the stakes were high. This was no different, except everyone in this cabin would pretend not to see what was happening. A second attendant appeared, whispering into the first one's ear. Their eyes flicked toward Marcus's suit, his polished shoes, the corporate tag on his briefcase. Something unspoken passed between them, and the clipboard snapped shut with a quiet finality. "Please remain standing until we're ready," the stewardess said, retreating with that same smile. Marcus kept his face unreadable, but his thoughts burned. Remain standing? For how long? Until humiliation became entertainment? He felt his phone vibrate once in his pocket, a silent signal from the world outside this pressurized cage. The engines shifted to a deeper growl, a sign that boarding was nearly complete. Passengers whispered behind raised hands. Someone coughed. The seatbelt sign blinked impatiently above. And still, Marcus remained upright, a lone figure in a tailored suit, waiting for a reason that never came. Then, just as the final boarding door clanged shut, the stewardess returned, eyes colder than before. "Sir," she said, her voice now clipped and commanding, "you'll need to follow me to the galley for further instructions." Marcus tightened his grip on the armrest, 1,000 calculations flashing through his mind. Was this their next move, or his? What waited for him beyond that narrow aisle would change everything. The cabin felt smaller with every passing minute, as if the air itself was shrinking around Marcus. He stood in the narrow aisle, his white shirt catching the soft overhead glow while his navy blue suit absorbed every curious stare. Around him, the passengers weren't just witnesses. They were a silent jury, each glance heavy with judgment, pity, or quiet fascination. A young mother in a red hoodie clutched her toddler tighter, whispering something Marcus couldn't hear. Two businessmen leaned toward each other, pretending to adjust their laptops while sneaking side glances at the black man who had somehow become the evening's unspoken headline. Even the sound of the engine seemed to dim beneath the low buzz of whispers. One passenger finally broke the silence. "What's happening?" A man near the emergency exit asked no one in particular. His voice carried just enough to spark a ripple of conversation. "Is he in the wrong seat?" someone replied, half curious, half certain. Marcus kept his eyes forward, resisting the urge to react. Years of high-stakes boardroom meetings had taught him that silence can speak louder than any argument. But inside his thoughts raced. Was anyone here brave enough to call this what it was? Or would they all hide behind their phones, collecting moments instead of courage? A teenage girl with braids raised her camera, her screen glowing faint blue in the dim cabin light. She wasn't just recording, she was framing history, her own small act of witness. Across the aisle, a man in a Yankees cap muttered, "Random check my foot," loud enough for Marcus to hear. The comment landed like a spark in a room full of dry wood, but no one followed. Then came the announcement. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, calm but laced with something sharper. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your discretion as we complete a necessary operational procedure." The words, discretion, operational, fell like a thin veil over the truth, corporate language built to hide discomfort. Marcus tightened his grip on the armrest. Somewhere behind that sterile announcement, decisions were being made about him, without him. And just as he wondered who truly held the power, a sudden metallic clang echoed from the front galley, followed by hurried footsteps moving his way. The soft engine hum was the only sound Marcus could hold on to as the stewardess stepped closer, her shadow cutting across the aisle. "Sir, I said stand. Now." Her voice was low but sharp enough to slice through the cabin. Marcus rose slowly, every movement deliberate, his crisp white shirt brushing against the leather seatback. Around him, first-class passengers froze, their half-finished drinks trembling in their cups. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, his tone calm, but the question carried a weight that dared her to answer truthfully. The stewardess tilted her head, that thin smile flickering again. "This is an operational necessity. We need to verify your seating arrangement for security reasons." The words operational necessity landed like a script written to sound harmless, yet every syllable burned with accusation. Marcus glanced at his ticket, still snug in the breast pocket of his navy blue suit. "You've already scanned my pass." Her smile vanished. "Sir, this isn't about your pass. It's about procedure. Please step aside." Phones lifted like a silent wave. Passengers sensed something ugly unfolding, but no one spoke. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, his whisper barely audible, "Random check, huh?" The words hung in the air, brittle and dangerous. Marcus stepped into the aisle, the overhead lights glaring against his polished shoes. The stewardess gestured toward the galley. "This way." Before he could move, a second attendant appeared, blocking his path with an arm stretched across the narrow corridor. The sudden motion startled Marcus, and then came the shock. Smack. The slap cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Gasps burst from every corner, followed by a storm of camera clicks and the sharp inhale of collective disbelief. Marcus didn't flinch. Years of boardroom battles had trained him to master his expression, but inside, his chest burned with a fury he refused to show. The stewardess froze, eyes wide as if even she couldn't believe what she'd done. A child began to cry. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," while another voice muttered, "Lawsuit." The engine's steady drone now felt like a drumbeat of accusation, each thrum reminding everyone they were trapped thousands of feet above the ground, watching a scene no one could stop. Marcus locked eyes with her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure you want to finish what you just started?" For the first time the stewardess stepped back. The second attendant lowered his arm, glancing toward the cockpit. Something, or someone, was coming. Then the cabin speaker crackled to life, a captain's voice breaking the tense silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated. This situation is being addressed." Addressed how? Addressed by whom? Marcus kept his face calm, but inside the question pulsed like a warning. Because the next sound wasn't the captain's voice, it was the heavy click of the cockpit door unlocking. The cabin still buzzed with shock, but Marcus stood motionless, a calm shadow against the sterile glow of the overhead lights. The sting of the stewardess's slap lingered on his cheek, but it wasn't pain that filled him, it was calculation. While passengers whispered and phones recorded every twitch of the crew, Marcus's mind moved 3 steps ahead. He wasn't just a passenger tonight. He was a strategist. Deep inside his jacket pocket, his phone vibrated once, a discreet signal. Before boarding, Marcus had placed a quiet call to a trusted contact in the airline's corporate office, a friend from graduate school who now sat in the upper floors of their executive tower. The call wasn't emotional. It was surgical. Marcus had used the language that powerful people understood. Discretion, operational necessity, and a single phrase that carried weight in boardrooms everywhere: brand risk. He had triggered an internal chain reaction long before the engines even powered on. In less than 60 seconds, his friend escalated the matter to the airline's chief of operations. Policy manuals were being opened. Logs were being pulled. Surveillance footage of the boarding process was already on a secure drive. Marcus knew the system because he had built similar ones in his own company. And tonight that system was about to work for him. The stewardess, unaware of the invisible storm, tried to reclaim control. "Sir, you need to cooperate," she said, her voice thinner now but still clipped. Marcus tilted his head slightly as if considering her words. He said nothing. Silence, he knew, was a weapon. It left her no script to hide behind. Across the aisle, a passenger muttered, "He didn't even do anything." Another whispered, "They can't just," before stopping, eyes darting to the crew. Tension rippled through first class like static before a lightning strike. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time he glanced at the screen. A single text glowed back at him. "Escalation confirmed. VP en route to ops floor." His lips barely moved as he exhaled. Good. It wasn't just about his dignity anymore. Marcus understood that in elite spaces like this, airports, planes, boardrooms, power was rarely loud. It was quiet, hidden in policies, cloaked in words like experience and random security checks. But he also knew those same systems could be turned against themselves when the right person knew which thread to pull. The stewardess stepped closer, trying to pierce the silence. "Sir, if you continue to resist, we may have to." Marcus finally spoke, voice low and deliberate. "May have to what?" "Remove a paying first-class passenger who followed every instruction." His eyes locked on hers. "Are you sure that's the operational necessity you want on record tonight?" Her mouth opened, then closed. The passengers leaned in, sensing a shift they couldn't name. The air itself seemed to tighten, as though the plane knew something was changing. Somewhere beneath their feet, the flight deck phone began to ring. A shrill, urgent tone. The first officer reached for it, his eyes flicking toward the cabin. Marcus caught the glance. His plan was already climbing the chain of command. A man 2 rows back whispered to his seatmate, "Who is this guy?" Marcus heard it but didn't turn. Let them wonder. Then the intercom cracked, a metallic chime slicing through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice said, tighter than before, "we're experiencing a brief operational delay. Please remain seated." But the delay wasn't mechanical. It was personal. And Marcus knew exactly who the next call would reach, and what it would set in motion. The stewardess looked toward the cockpit, confusion flickering across her face. Marcus's phone buzzed one more time, a single word lighting the screen like a fuse: "Stand by." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, heart steady, eyes forward. The real counterstrike hadn't even begun. The cabin grew strangely quiet, like the moment after a thunderclap when everyone waits to see if the storm is over. The stewardess who had barked orders at Marcus now kept her eyes locked on the beverage cart, pretending to rearrange napkins. The captain's voice floated through the speakers, calm and routine, as if nothing explosive had just happened. For a few tense minutes, it felt as if the humiliation might finally be over. Marcus stayed seated, his crisp white shirt still sharp under the overhead lights, but his mind was moving faster than the plane rolling toward the runway. He felt the buzz of his phone in his palm, confirmation that his quiet call had reached the airline's top brass. A ripple of control had already started, hidden behind the curtain of corporate discretion. He breathed slow, masking the adrenaline that still raced through his chest. Around him, passengers whispered into phones, thumbs flying over screens. A woman across the aisle caught his eye and gave a small nod, like she was silently apologizing for the crew's behavior. But even in that flicker of solidarity, Marcus sensed the unease. The staff hadn't surrendered, they were only regrouping. He could almost feel their eyes tracking him, waiting for one wrong move they could call operational necessity. The engines rumbled as the plane taxied, a low growl that matched the tension crawling through the cabin. Marcus kept his posture calm, but every detail sharpened. The smell of burnt coffee, the squeak of rubber wheels under the cart, the faint metallic click of a seatbelt a row behind him. This wasn't relief. This was a pause before the next strike. He thought about the call he'd made and the quiet power it carried. The airline's executives were already scrambling behind closed doors, but the crew didn't know that yet. And that ignorance made them dangerous. If they tried again, it wouldn't just be about humiliation, it would be about control. Then a sudden chime cut through the cabin. The seatbelt light flickered. A second, sharper tone followed. Passengers glanced at each other, puzzled. Marcus tilted his head, catching the faint shuffle of hurried footsteps from behind the cockpit door. Something, or someone, was coming. Before Marcus could decipher the sound, the cockpit door clicked open with a force that made every passenger turn. The cabin settled into a strange, fragile quiet, but Marcus knew it wouldn't last. He'd seen this pattern before. Power never gives up after one setback. Across the aisle, the lead stewardess kept her back stiff, pretending to check a service manual that didn't need checking. Her shoulders betrayed her, tense and coiled like a spring. Passengers whispered in low tones, eyes flicking from Marcus to the crew and back again. A man in a gray hoodie leaned toward his seatmate and muttered, "Something's not over." The woman beside him nodded, clutching her phone like proof of what she'd already recorded. Marcus sat perfectly still, every inch of his navy blue suit unwrinkled, his white shirt untouched by the chaos. He watched the stewardess confer with another crew member near the galley. Their voices were low, but the glances were sharp, like they were trying to reclaim a sense of authority without drawing more attention. He could almost hear the coded language: operational necessity, random security check, passenger compliance. Words designed to sound neutral while carrying hidden edges. Inside, Marcus felt a steady pulse of resolve. His earlier call to the airline's upper management was already moving through the chain of command. But until the next signal arrived, the crew still held the physical space that made them dangerous. He pictured every possible move: another false accusation, a sudden demand to deplane, a routine inspection designed to corner him. The captain's voice broke through the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience as we finalize takeoff clearance." Finalize. The word felt heavy, deliberate. Marcus caught the stewardess glance toward the cockpit just as the door cracked open a few inches before snapping shut again. He noticed a passenger 2 rows ahead raise a phone for a clearer angle, only for a junior attendant to step forward, blocking the shot with a forced smile. The gesture was small, but the message was loud: "We're still watching." Marcus adjusted his cufflinks slowly, refusing to look away. Power was shifting again, but which direction? Then, without warning, the seatbelt light blinked off. The engines softened. And a single sharp knock came from behind the cockpit door, 3 quick raps that made every head turn at once. The engines hummed low, a restless growl beneath the cabin's forced quiet. Marcus adjusted the cuff of his navy blue jacket, a slow, deliberate movement that masked the alert pounding in his chest. Across the aisle, the lead stewardess reappeared, her polished shoes clicking like a warning bell against the narrow floor. Her face wore a neutral airline smile, but her eyes carried something sharper, something that said this wasn't over. "Sir," she began, voice dipped in syrup but edged with steel, "we need to verify your seating assignment again." Operational necessity. The phrase cut like a coded blade. Operational necessity. It sounded official, harmless, but everyone in first class heard the undertone. "We can remove you if we want." Phones tilted upward. Passengers exchanged quick looks, the unspoken question flickering between them. Why him again? Marcus met her gaze without blinking. My boarding pass hasn't changed, he said, his tone calm but unyielding. He handed it over anyway, forcing her to hold the proof of his right to be there. She barely glanced at it before returning it with a clipped nod. Thank you for your cooperation, she said, words sweet but heavy with frustration. She lingered for a beat too long, like she was waiting for him to flinch or make a mistake she could exploit. Behind her, a junior attendant shifted nervously. Captain requests a private word, he blurted, voice cracking against the tense air. Several passengers sucked in sharp breaths. A man near the window muttered, "Why? He hasn't done anything." His seatmate shushed him, eyes darting toward the cockpit door that now stood ominously shut. Marcus felt the cabin lean toward him, dozens of unseen expectations pressing down. Should he stand? Refuse? His mind raced through possibilities. A quiet removal, a staged security check, another humiliation disguised as procedure. He pictured headlines forming before the plane even touched down. He rose slowly, buttoning his jacket as if entering a boardroom, not a trap. "Lead the way," he said, voice steady enough to mask the current of adrenaline surging beneath. The stewardess turned sharply, motioning toward the cockpit. Passengers craned their necks as Marcus stepped into the aisle. The air seemed to thicken with every step, whispers rising like a tide behind him. Someone whispered, "This isn't random anymore." Just as Marcus reached the narrow door, the plane jolted with a sudden, unexpected shudder. Overhead bins rattled. Lights flickered once, then steadied. A muffled knock sounded from inside the cockpit, 2 quick raps, then silence. The stewardess froze, hand halfway to the latch. Her polished smile slipped for the first time, replaced by a flash of something raw, fear or maybe recognition. Marcus caught the flicker and felt the entire cabin hold its breath. What waited behind that door wasn't just a captain's request. It was something else. Something planned. The narrow aisle felt like a pressure chamber, each breath heavier than the last. Marcus stood only a few feet from the cockpit door, the stewardess blocking his path like a human checkpoint. Passengers leaned forward, phones poised, eyes darting between Marcus and the locked door. Somewhere deep in the aircraft, a chime echoed, a soft ding that carried the weight of an unspoken command. Before anyone could move, the door latch clicked. Slowly, the cockpit door eased open. A tall figure stepped into view, the gleam of a pilot's badge catching the overhead light. He wasn't the captain everyone expected. His uniform carried the same crisp authority, but the face behind it was unfamiliar to most. His presence was deliberate, almost surgical. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, his voice calm but edged with command. Every syllable carried the quiet certainty of someone used to giving orders at 30,000 feet. The lead stewardess stiffened. "This is a routine verification, Captain," she replied quickly, though her smile faltered. "I'm not the captain," the man said, stepping fully into the cabin. "I'm a contracted aviation consultant. And tonight, I'm an observer for the Executive Safety Board." His ID badge, silver, embossed, glinted like a verdict. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Passengers shifted, sensing the power dynamic tilt. The stewardess's polished facade cracked for the first time. "Observer?" she repeated, voice tight. "I wasn't informed." "You weren't supposed to be," he interrupted, tone firm but controlled. "This flight was flagged for a discreet compliance review." Imagine my surprise when I watched a paying first-class passenger singled out, repeatedly. His gaze sharpened, locking on the stewardess until she instinctively stepped back. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. This was the moment he'd engineered with a quiet phone call before the wheels even left the gate. His ally, an old friend from his Air Force contracting days, had been seated in the cockpit from the start, watching, waiting. The consultant turned to Marcus. "Mr. Ellison, I apologize for the treatment you've received. Please return to your seat. This conversation is over." The words landed like a gavel. Murmurs erupted across first class. A woman near the bulkhead whispered, "Did he just say Mr. Ellison?" Another passenger muttered, "They knew his name?" Phones tilted higher, recording every second. The stewardess opened her mouth to object but stopped when the consultant produced a sleek tablet, its screen glowing with an airline executive seal. "I've already initiated an internal incident report," he said. "Further escalation could compromise the crew's standing with corporate. Are you sure you want to continue?" Silence. The hum of the engines filled the void, louder now, like a living heartbeat. The stewardess lowered her eyes, the fight draining from her posture. She stepped aside, her carefully curated authority evaporating under the weight of someone who clearly outranked her. Marcus returned to his seat, the aisle parting as passengers pulled back to give him room. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others kept their eyes down, unsure whether to cheer or hide. As Marcus buckled his seatbelt, the consultant leaned slightly toward him, speaking low enough for only a few nearby passengers to hear. "The executives are already aware," he said. "Expect a direct call before we land." Marcus gave a slight, measured nod, his expression unreadable. He wasn't surprised. This was exactly the outcome he'd anticipated. Still, beneath the calm, a flicker of tension remained. Because if the executives were already involved, this wasn't just about a single humiliating flight. It was bigger. Much bigger. The consultant turned to leave but paused halfway down the aisle. He looked back, eyes scanning the cabin with quiet authority, and then, almost as an afterthought, said, "We may need to divert." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Divert. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the engines seemed to wait. What kind of diversion was coming, and who would pay the price? The moment the pilot stepped forward, the cabin shifted from quiet tension to controlled chaos. Passengers who had been frozen in their seats started whispering louder, their voices rising above the steady hum of the engines. The stewardess who had barked orders at Marcus just minutes ago now stood stiff, her thin smile gone. Behind her, a junior attendant clutched a tablet, eyes wide as if waiting for instructions that would never come. Marcus stayed seated, his navy suit perfectly pressed, his calm a direct contrast to the frantic energy around him. The pilot, broad-shouldered, crisp uniform, eyes sharp, didn't need to raise his voice. "This situation is no longer in your hands," he said evenly, his words slicing through the heavy air. Every passenger heard it. Every passenger understood what it meant. Phones were already recording. A man in row 3 whispered, "This is going viral," while another muttered, "They're done." In the back, a mother clutched her child closer, sensing the weight of something bigger than a simple flight delay. Marcus glanced toward the aisle, catching the trembling hands of the flight attendant who had started it all. Her authority, once unquestioned, now hung by a thread. Then came the first ripple. A chime sounded overhead, an incoming message to the crew. The junior attendant's tablet lit up with a bright red alert. Immediate discretion required. Passenger 4A, priority review. Executives monitoring in real time. Her face drained of color. Marcus didn't need to see the words. He knew the call he placed before takeoff had already reached the top floor of the airline's headquarters. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot said, turning to address the cabin, "on behalf of the airline, I apologize for the disruption." His voice carried the weight of someone who understood the stakes. Behind him, the stewardess started to stammer an explanation, but the pilot's subtle shake of his head silenced her. The power had shifted completely. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "Apologies are a start," he said, meeting the stewardess's eyes, "but accountability is what matters." Passengers murmured in agreement, some nodding, some recording every word. The hum of the engines now sounded like a drumbeat of justice, steady and inevitable. Somewhere far above the clouds, a boardroom full of executives was scrambling, their expensive conference calls colliding with the reality unfolding in seat 4A. They thought they could contain it. They thought they could control the narrative. But Marcus had already set a chain reaction in motion, one that no corporate policy could stop. As the pilot leaned toward Marcus, lowering his voice to a confidential tone, a new notification buzzed on the junior attendant's tablet. Her eyes widened even further as she read it. Whatever it said, she looked up at Marcus with a mix of fear and awe. And just like that, the pilot's calm expression shifted, ever so slightly, as if the next message carried a warning no one was ready to hear. What could be so urgent that it made even the pilot's confidence crack? The cabin lights dimmed to a low, golden glow as the plane cruised high above the clouds. For the first time all night, Marcus felt the weight of silence settle around him. Not the heavy silence of humiliation, but the kind that invites reflection. He rested his hands on the armrests, fingers steady now, and stared out at the endless black sky streaked with faint silver stars. Down below, the world slept, unaware of the quiet storm that had just reshaped an entire airline's night. Marcus replayed every moment in his mind, the sharp command to stand, the slap that froze the cabin, the trembling stewardess when her authority crumbled. Each memory carried its own sting but also a strange sense of power. He thought of the boardrooms he'd fought to enter, the contracts he'd negotiated while people questioned his worth before he even spoke. Tonight was different. Tonight he had forced an elite space to face itself in real time. Passengers still whispered in soft clusters, their eyes flicking toward Marcus with a new kind of recognition. Some looked guilty, remembering the moments they stayed silent. Others carried the quiet respect of people who had witnessed courage they didn't know how to name. A man across the aisle gave a small nod, a wordless acknowledgement that spoke louder than any apology. Marcus closed his eyes for a second, letting the steady hum of the engines fill the space where anger once lived. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about every closed door, every suspicious glance, every random check, wrapped in the language of discretion. He thought of his younger self, the kid from Atlanta who had learned to keep his voice even while the world tried to shake him. Tonight proved that power doesn't always roar. It can move silently, like a current beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to break open. But as Marcus opened his eyes, a flicker of unease returned. The junior attendant hurried past, clutching a tablet glowing with a new alert. She paused near the cockpit, whispering urgently to the pilot. His jaw tightened. Marcus caught the faint reflection of red letters flashing across the screen. Something else was happening, something bigger than apologies. The flight touched down in New York just past midnight, but the storm brewing inside the airline was only beginning. As the cabin doors opened, Marcus rose slowly, the navy blue suit still flawless despite hours of tension. Passengers parted without a word, some offering quiet nods, others staring as if they knew they'd just witnessed the start of something bigger than a late-night flight. Marcus stepped into the jet bridge, the cold bite of airport air mixing with the faint smell of jet fuel, and felt a different kind of pressure, one that followed him beyond the plane. His phone buzzed before he cleared the terminal. A single line lit the screen, full executive review initiated. Media holding statement drafted. The message came from a senior contact inside the airline, someone who rarely texted at night. Marcus's pulse steadied. The investigation he triggered midair was already moving faster than he'd planned. Down in the baggage claim, uniformed supervisors huddled near a private door. Their faces carried the tight, pale look of people calculating damage in real time. Marcus caught fragments of their low voices, words like operational necessity, customer experience, and containment strategy. Corporate language designed to bury mistakes. But tonight, the burial wouldn't be quiet. Across the hall, a young gate agent whispered into a headset, eyes darting toward Marcus before quickly turning away. Another alert pinged his phone, board members requesting early briefing. Possible federal inquiry. That one made him pause. A federal inquiry? For a single slap at 35,000 feet? The airline wasn't just nervous, they were terrified. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, his reflection flickering in a polished glass wall. He thought about the stewardess who had started it all, about the pilot ally who turned the night on its head, and about every silent passenger who filmed but said nothing. This wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was a reckoning. Policies would be rewritten. Careers would break. And yet, something in the air hinted that the fight wasn't finished. As Marcus walked toward the exit, another notification appeared, one he didn't expect. A private number. Just 3 words, they know more. He stopped cold, thumb hovering over the screen. Who was they, and what did they know that even he didn't? Morning sunlight spilled across the Manhattan skyline as Marcus stepped into the quiet corner office of his legal team. The glass walls reflected a city already humming with energy, but inside, the room felt sharp and still, like the calm before a verdict. Overnight, the airline's board had scrambled, their so-called discretion meetings leaking to the press before sunrise. Headlines now filled every screen. CEO assaults sparks federal review, operational necessity or racial bias? The company's carefully polished image was cracking in real time. Marcus stood by the window watching taxis blur into streaks of yellow far below. His phone vibrated again. Another alert. Federal Transportation Commission confirms investigation. A second ping followed. Shareholders demand emergency session. Marcus exhaled slowly. The same quiet breath he took when the stewardess's hand first struck his shoulder now carried the weight of a national reckoning. He thought about the passengers who filmed but stayed silent, the pilot ally who chose courage over protocol, and the crew members who hid behind corporate phrases like customer experience and operational necessity. They had all played a part in a single, painful truth. Racism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles thinly, asks for your ticket and hopes you'll just sit down. Outside the office door, Marcus's attorney entered with a folder thick with evidence. Videos, texts, internal memos already leaked by insiders unwilling to protect a broken system. They're offering a private settlement, she said carefully. Money, a public apology, but no admission of discrimination. Marcus turned from the window. Tell them this isn't about money, he said quietly. Tell them it's about change. His voice carried the calm authority of someone who knew that real power isn't in a check, it's in the policies rewritten after the cameras leave. For a long moment, he stood in silence, letting the hum of New York traffic rise like the engine that once carried him through humiliation at 500 miles per hour. He remembered every stare, every whisper, every calculated smile, and he refused to let it fade into another headline forgotten by morning. And here's where you come in. Imagine this happening to you, to a loved one, on a night when all you wanted was to get home. Would you stay quiet, or would you fight back even when the system bets on your silence? Marcus chose to fight. Now it's your turn to speak. Before you scroll away, take a stand. Like this video if you believe silence only protects the powerful. Share it so more people see how hidden bias operates in plain sight. And subscribe, because stories like this aren't rare, and you deserve to know the next time someone tries to bury the truth. Justice moves when we refuse to look away. Will you look away, or will you stay with us for the next fight?